So on Monday, January 15th, Davos 2024 began, and we have to talk about it. At first, I wonder what tyranny they would speak of this time, but of course, it's the same old agenda. However, this video is just our introduction to everything, so let's start at the beginning. On the World Economic Forum website, they start off their promotional material by talking about the poly crisis. We've actually talked about this quite a bit recently. Their latest buzzword, George Soros, calls it the crisis of everything. So, why don't we see what they have to say? And I quote, "Last year at Davos, the word polycrisis was on everybody's lips. Today, even as we turn our attention to new crises, the old ones persist. So the question for leaders at Davos 2024, will the coming year be a period of perma-crisis, or will 2024 be a time for resolution, resilience, and recovery?" Yeah, a possible perma-crisis, huh? A permanent crisis. Well, this should be fun. The main theme for this year's event is rebuilding trust, which is hilarious, and check this out. Beyond the official events, attendees have previously reveled in extravagant bunga parties with cocaine, caviar, champagne, and $2,500 a night hookers. All I know is that if Epstein's alive, he is probably backstage. Anyway, after reading a headline about cocaine bunga parties and hookers, let's get back to talking about how they want to rebuild trust. Yeah.
Now, why did we choose the theme or the motto, rebuilding trust? If we compare the world today with the world before we had the COVID pandemics, we find a completely different mood. First, the world has become very fearful, very fragmented, of course, and in such a situation, trust have vanished. We have lost trust to a certain extent in each another because we all have become under the pressure of the crisis, of the multiple crises. We have become more egoistic. So, and if you are more egoistic, you think first of yourself, and this distorts an atmosphere of trust. So if we want to recreate, and that's the objective of the annual meetings this year, we want to recreate a new spirit, a much more constructive spirit. Again, looking forward and having confidence in our future. And that's the reason why we have chosen this theme, rebuilding trust.
You know, it's just crazy to hear. World leaders and institutions did not lose trust because of the pressure surrounding the pandemic. And when he says that we have become egotistical, I'm pretty sure he's referring to us. Look, we have not become egotistical in the sense that we just believe we know better for no reason. It's that their lies fly in the face of basic common sense. And plus, we can all look up information at our will. That's why we've seen journalists come out with ridiculous stories such as this, warning people not to do their own research. Yeah, journalism 101. The fact is, with modern tech, it's just very, very easy to tell that we've been systematically lied to for many years. Hence the push for global censorship. Which brings us to the Global Risk Report of 2024. This was released right before Davos began. They have these marked off in the near term, within 2 years, and the long term, within 10. Everything from societal upheaval, economic collapse, major weather events, migration, pollution, civil conflict, you know, the basics. However, at number 1 on the near term, they have misinformation and disinformation. Yes, that's right, according to the World Economic Forum and basically every government in the world, information is the biggest threat. And yeah, it is a threat to their agenda. They are right about that. So, on that note, let's take a listen to Ursula, Queen of the Draconian, talking about this mission of rebuilding trust.
For the global business community, the top concern for the next 2 years is not conflict or climate. It is disinformation and misinformation, followed closely by polarization within our societies. These risks are serious because they limit our ability to tackle the big global challenges we are facing.
Yeah, let's stop right there for a second. Information and free speech inhibit their ability to focus on global challenges. What they mean is that free speech is a threat to their agenda. Just look at any aspect to this. Their entire economic plan is fascism, or techno-fascism to be exact. It's the use of technology, or artificial intelligence, and corporatism. I'm actually a little surprised that not a single journalist has ever questioned them on stakeholder capitalism. The reason is very simple though. Take a look at this clip from a BlackRock executive on the first day of Davos.
I think the global infrastructure story, and it really is a global story for many reasons, right? We have outdated infrastructure think of the UK, think of the US, massive need for infrastructure spending. We have the entire transition story, the energy transition story. You'll hear more about that later on today, I'm sure. That's going to require trillions of investments, and we have stretched governments. I think this is one of the key stories that also underpins this transaction that Larry and Bio announced last week, that you have very much stretched governments. So public-private partnerships, particularly in these vast infrastructure projects, are going to be a very big story. And this is something where we want to be part of it. And so I think that's a great opportunity, both in Europe and in the US as well as in Asia.
Look, if people find out the entire foundation of this economic plan is fascistic in nature, then it's over. These public-private partnerships, that's corporatism. Merging the public sector, government, with the private sector, corporations. I mean, come on, that's fascism. And you know, they can't have people identify that real basic distinction, so you aren't going to be allowed to talk about it. What about climate change? Well, all of their proposals involve liquidating your wealth, economic degrowth, human population control, and creating a monopoly on all the world's resources. Well, you can't have that info getting out there, right? So here comes the censorship. What about offering government aid and possibly universal basic income? Yeah, well, that one's going to depend on compliance with government initiatives. And this also involves their plan to render billions of people as economically useless.
Entities in the world, after thousands of years, during which humans were the rulers of the world, authority and power will shift away from humans to computers, and most humans will become economically useless and politically powerless. Already today, we are beginning to see the creation of a new class of humans, the useless class. Just as the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century created the new working class, the proletariat, so now the artificial intelligence revolution is beginning to create the useless class.
What about their medical initiatives? Well, that's just going to be 24/7 surveillance via biometric monitoring.
COVID is critical because this is what convinces people to accept, to legitimize total biometric surveillance.
Facial recognition and security? Well, that's going to lead to predictive policing. These governments even want to use AI predictive models to handle elections.
So technology now is, and digital technologies mainly have an analytical power. Now we go into a predictive power, and we have seen the first examples, and your company very much involved into it. But then the next step could be to go into a prescriptive mode, which means you do not even have to have elections anymore, because you can already predict, and afterwards you can say, why do we need elections? Because we know what the result will be. Can you imagine such a world?
They want to get rid of your voice in the political process, and these are just some basics. What about their plans for central bank digital currency? Well, that's programmable money.
If you think about the benefits of digital money, there are huge potential gains. It's not just about digital forms of physical currency. You can have programmability, units of central bank currency with expiry dates. You could have, as I argue in my book, a potentially better and some people might see it, or a darker world where the government decides that units of central bank money can be used to purchase some things, but not other things that it deems less desirable.
If you dissent, they can shut you out of the banking system. They can prohibit you from even buying food. The point is that if people find out the truth about any of this, then it's over for them. And you might have heard about a recent declaration from Trump about this very issue.
And tonight I'm also making another promise to protect Americans from government tyranny. As your president, I will never allow the creation of a central bank digital currency. Do you know about that?
This is a massive win for everybody, and we have to hold them to it. And I still don't think enough people understand how dark this quote-unquote new system will get.
A little bit far-fetched, and you might be thinking that this kind of authoritarian control over your money is not going to be anything that we'll see in the future. Unfortunately, this is already implemented in the world. In China, the government is already able to program what its citizens can and cannot spend their money on. Over the last few years, they've limited millions of people's ability to buy things like train tickets, passports, and luxury goods. They're able to do this because of China's intense social credit system that links each person's identity and actions to their bank account, allowing the government to see and to control everything a citizen does with their money. And it seems like the West is paying attention. In nations like Sweden, South Africa, and Canada, trials of programmable central bank currencies are already underway. In fact, almost half of the world's nations are at some stage of implementing this kind of programmable money, meaning no matter where in the world you live, this technology is likely only a few years away. Okay, so how does programmable money tie in with the personal carbon limit? Well, it all comes down to whether or not you've gone over your monthly usage, and if you have, there are two possible case scenarios for that. The most openly talked about penalty for a person going over their individual carbon limit is that they'd simply get charged for doing so, just the same as what happens to large companies today. Taken too many car trips this month, or bought a little bit too much meat? In that case, you'd simply get a bill at the end of each month from your government, so you can pay the price of being a naughty citizen. As your entire carbon usage would be tracked by a government CBDC, there would be no way to hide how much carbon you've used. And since they now also hold the keys to your money, they won't even need to send you a bill for your excess usage. Potentially, they'll just automatically pull your fine from your bank account.
The fact is, they've been talking about all of this for decades now. You just have to pay attention. However, I'm getting the feeling that the Davos elite are starting to realize that they can't just openly discuss this stuff anymore. And what most people don't realize is that there are actually two separate Davos events, one in public and one away from the prying eyes of the public.
Klaus Schwab told us that Davos is where Melinda's husband, Bill Gates, first met the World Health Organization and got the idea to give away billions for immunizations. It turns out there are two Davoses, one you see and one you don't. After hours and behind the windows, there are hundreds of private parties where deals are done.
So, if they say this authoritarian and dystopian stuff in their speeches, right out in the open for everybody to hear, just imagine the bleak realities that are discussed behind closed doors. You know what I mean? You know, it is tough to listen to this stuff because I know for a fact they aren't this deluded. All of the clips I've watched so far about rebuilding trust is just them wondering out loud, oh, we have no idea why no one trusts us anymore. And it's bullshit. They know exactly why no one trusts them. They lie constantly and claim that anything that goes against this agenda is, misinformation, whether it's true or not. So, what was that about building trust again? Yeah, that can't happen when your whole pitch is to stop the masses from communicating with each other, punishing people for wrongthink, and stopping the free flow of information. You might remember the Davos event, The Great Narrative.
So here, I think the next 2 days, we will look how we imagine, how we decide, how we execute the great narratives, how we define the story of our world for the future.
Well, they are losing control of this highly coveted narrative, and this freaks them out. They are deathly afraid of nations electing populist leaders like the Netherlands, France, Argentina, and the United States. They are pulling out all the stops to get nations to elect Davos-approved puppets. However, they're even coming out with a couple new terms because, again, people are catching on to their games. You're going to start seeing malinformation. This is essentially being described as exposing information with malicious intent. It almost sounds as if they're fighting against true information being released with the intent of exposing their lies. And personally, I am pretty malicious in my attempts to dismantle their tyrannical aspirations. Anyway, they want to frame it this way as a method of conflating terrorism with independent journalism and free speech. Personally, I think this change in language is going to lead towards criminal charges for speech, similar to what's happening in Ireland, the UK, and Canada. He was malicious in exposing our corruption. It destabilized society. He caused chaos and violence by telling the masses the truth. He must be punished. That sort of thing. The bottom line is that every attendee at Davos is getting their marching orders to kill free speech in 2024. If you remember back in 2020, the World Economic Forum launched the Global Coalition for Digital Safety. And that's just a global coalition for mass censorship. They are not going to give up on this. I mean, really, they can't. If people know the truth and the extent of this agenda, then everything falls apart. Anyway, this part from the Global Risk Report is very, very telling, and I quote, "Over the next 2 years, the report states foreign and domestic actors alike will leverage misinformation and disinformation to widen societal and political divides. This is enhanced by a large number of elections in the near future." Ooh, the World Economic Forum talking about elections. This is not good. And I quote again, "With more than 3 billion people due to head to the polls in 2024 and 2025, including in major economies like the United States, India, and the UK. The report suggests that the spread of misinformation and disinformation around the globe could result in civil unrest, but could also drive government-driven censorship, domestic propaganda, and controls on the free flow of information." End of quote. So I would just like you to notice how they phrased that last part. Misinformation could cause civil unrest. That's bad. But could also drive government-driven censorship, domestic propaganda, and controls on the free flow of information. They are framing that as a good thing. And it's either terribly veiled, or they simply do not care if you know their true intention. The key here is that public trust vanished because they all lied to the entire world about every major issue repeatedly, and they still are. However, there is a lot of stuff to be hopeful for. I mean, we have protests still going on. Canada, Australia, France, the Netherlands, and now Germany. People are rising up against tyrannical governments and organizations like the World Economic Forum, the WHO, and the UN. And it's all in protest to their Agenda 2030 goals. And we are just getting started. This war on food is insane. This has to be one of the most dangerous aspects to their agenda. We've heard them all say it. Agriculture has to change to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, come on. The World Economic Forum even released a video condemning the cultivation of rice due to nitrogen emissions. All around the world, from Canada to the Netherlands, they're all chasing this nitrogen target too. And they will strip people of their land or bankrupt them to get there. We'll be talking about this again because it was actually a very big topic at this year's Davos. Soil was even deemed a national security threat by Antony Blinken, oddly enough. But the truth is that no one wants this future except for the elite because it solely benefits the elite. The intellectual dishonesty plaguing every single institution has reached a tipping point. I think we're at that moment where the detrimental aspects to this agenda become self-evident and obvious to the majority. Every day, more and more people see how they use lies, fraud, and force as their method of persuasion, rather than honest debate. All around the world, governments, universities, medical institutions, and especially the media, revealed their true nature and intent. They all conspire to lie to the public, and it's only a matter of time before it all comes crashing down. I truly feel like they've destroyed themselves. We are just witnessing, the death throes right now. The final twitches before the light goes out on this tyrannical system for good. However, we do have a few things to worry about. Mainly, it's the fact that with desperation comes a very, very high potential for lashing out with destructive force. Unfortunately, we're going to have to save that for the next video, because I do have to separate Disease X from everything else. The reason, as you could probably guess, is because if it gets censored, then everything else we talked about today gets tossed out with it. However, to finish up, I want to show you this recent clip of Yuval Harari, and then we're going to talk about it for a second. In this clip, he says that Donald Trump will be the death blow to the global order. He then says politicians present a false dichotomy of nationalism versus global governance. And I have a problem with that.
You concerned that Trump might be elected again? Shortly?
I think it's very likely. And if it happens, it is likely to be the kind of like the death blow to what remains of the global order. And he says it openly. Now again, it should be clear that many of these politicians, they present a false dichotomy, a false binary vision of the world, as if you have to choose between patriotism and globalism, between being loyal to your nation and being loyal to some kind of, global government or whatever.
And I quote, "A false binary vision of the world, as if you have to choose between patriotism and globalism. Choose between being loyal to your nation or loyal to a global government or whatever." End of quote. I mean, it is clearly a fork in the road, and you can only choose one. Don't let anybody tell you different. Patriotism versus globalism. Well, destroying national sovereignty, removing public consent, and removing our voice in the political process is a fundamental aspect to this agenda. The wishes of the people have no bearing on their policy decisions. This establishes at its core a concrete and true dichotomy between these political philosophies. They are 100% entirely incompatible with each other. And again, don't let anybody tell you different. One thing I wish the Davos crowd would understand is that people and institutions that refuse to admit error eventually discredit themselves, and they have. So, just be careful who you trust, because at best, it's a careless pursuit. At worst, it's a good way to get yourself killed. And just remember, never be afraid to raise your voice for honesty and truth, especially when it's up against injustice, lying, and greed. If people did this all over the world, everything would change.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it.
Once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals or Subscribestar. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas, and yes, I do hope you have a good night.